Now, during the 2016 Presidential Summit on Governance and Corruption in State House, Nairobi, President Uhuru Kenyatta expressed his helplessness, ripped into anti-corruption officials and their approach in the fight against graft in the country. With the creation of anti-graft institutions, committees, working groups and task forces, the war on graft seems unwinnable. After 2 years of what appeared to be the perfect partnership, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nurdin Haji, and the Director of Criminal Investigations, DCI boss George Kinoti, appear not reading from the same hymn sheet, with divisions playing out in court on Tuesday. Frustrated by inability to successfully convict a single big fish case despite avalanche of cases in courts, how will the duo restore public trust and win the war against graft? By the Member of Parliament, Millie Odhiambo. She is in Parliament on an ODM ticket. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Oshimiwa. And Ben Mulwa, governance and political commentator, equally here in the country. Before we get their sentiments in regard to the war on graft, what needs to be done, what needs to be fixed in the short time possible for President Uhuru Kenyatta to walk away with the perfect scorecard, here is what the two gentlemen had to say today in addressing the media with regards to the divisions that played out in court on Tuesday between the DCI and the DPP.
Hatujakosana wala kuna mzozo wote baina yetu sisi na DCI wala na EACC.
So such things, I can assure you, they usually do happen time to time. But if they recur again or we see it again, that is when we can always see there is a problem.
Ni kitu muna create kama watu wawili wameninio huko officers. Sisi as principals we have no problem.
Honorable Millie Odhiambo, if I may come to you in regards to the profound lack of the absence in successful convictions in the war on graft. Does this perhaps add to the deepening lack of trust among the public in regard to the efforts now intensified by the government in ending corruption in the country?
Well, I think that would be a factor. But I think one of the lack of trust stems from the fact that a lot of time we have been prosecuting these issues in the media. And I think a lot of people had warned the DPP when he took office that he should avoid using the media. And the reason is that, you know, corruption cases are not cases that you start today and they end tomorrow. So when you go to the media and make the public have faith that, you know, this is a done deal, and yet, you know, sometimes their evidentiary level of proof is really low. Sometimes they don't have that much evidence, but then you have already hyped the matter in the public. I would actually advise that they do less of public briefings and more of behind the scene work, so that we know that when you go to court, we are expecting, you know, serious work. We know that, you know, if I was did the DPP, then I would actually create a legacy that, you know, whatever case he brings in court, you know, is a serious matter. But instead of going to hype these matters in the public, and even their recent, you know, discontent makes it even worse, because already, you know, these are officers that have had very little public faith, but the public was beginning to, you know, gain faith in them. But when you now start having that sort of discordance, they are actually making it worse. And if it was in different democracies, actually, the both of them would have lost their jobs. That's not the kind of thing that you take at a serious level and come out, because they're actually failing the president with that kind of action.
And of course, the concern is that besides the president, you look at it and the economic consequence is equally so enormous in the sense that it accounts for some slash of the country's GDP in terms of what goes into private pocket. I'm talking about 500 billion Kenya shillings of the national budget. Ben Mulwa, if I may come to you, the perception is that this war is unwinnable. The duo came to office at a time when there was what I may call a dwindling sense of support in terms of what came from the government, because Keriako Tobiko left office. Haji took over with more than 4,000 cases which were not prosecuted successfully in courts of law. He came with that hope. So was DCI boss George Kinoti, who took over from Ndegwa Mohoro. Do you think by their input so far, the past 2 years, that there can be something tangible out of it in terms of the prophecy, and can we win this war?
Definitely the war on corruption can be won. that's given. Unfortunately, as Mheshimiwa has pointed out, and I have been consistent complaining about the dramatization on the war on corruption, because we reached a point whereby we were being treated to a lot of drama. We were being treated to a lot of theatrics and very powerful statements coming from either of the offices, including the EACC. But you see, there is one thing that we have to agree. There has been consistent blame on the judiciary. But one thing we have to notice is that you cannot take fitina to court and expect to achieve much. It's unfortunate that the two officers at some point began to appear to fight political wars more than actually pursuing genuinely fighting corruption. We have many cases. You remember there is a time like in towards the end of 2018 and the last year 2019, there was a lot of Kamata Fridays with a lot of pomp and a lot of video and media coverage. But 2 years down the line, there is actually very little to show. And I don't think those officers, because initially there was the impression being created, but the stumbling block was the judiciary. I don't think those two officers can confidently come before Kenyans today. Excuse me. I don't think those two officers can confidently come before Kenyans today and say that we have been able to present this much and the judiciary has been slow on this front. So it begins to expose them in terms of whether they really have tangible and credible stuff that they have been pursuing to prosecute. And that is also why they are losing faith with Kenyans, because there was a lot of expectation. In that point, and they had a lot of goodwill actually from Kenyans.
Okay, that's notwithstanding. You mentioned the fact that there seems to be disjointed criminal justice system then. At some point, the duo accused the judiciary of being the missing link in the fight against corruption.
Yes.
And to be specific, I'm talking about the 2019
anti-corruption conference, yes,
at the Bomas of Kenya.
Yes.
Now it's between the DCI and the DPP, who at some point accused the judiciary.
What we are witnessing...
It seems there is a missing link in this whole scenario. And what does a weak criminal justice system mean in the entire effort, and what President Uhuru Kenyatta wants as the byproduct?
Of course, any weak link within the entire process is a win for the corrupt. And it's a major win, actually, for those who would wish to subvert justice. But what we are witnessing specifically now between the DCI and the DPP, I want to believe that I have taken time to look through most of the cases that have been presented to court by the DPP, those that have been investigated by the EACC, and also those that have been investigated by the DCI. And one thing that I don't hold forte for any of them, but I want to believe that the DCI has made, especially since Kinoti assumed office, there has been very deliberate effort to do thorough investigations in terms of unearthing some of these corrupt dealings. There has been a lot of exposure in terms of what really has been happening. So I don't want to think that the investigation would really be the problem. But I want to give you or to highlight a case that I am fairly privy to in terms of the status of prosecution. All Kenyans remember very well on the December 6th when Governor Sonko was dramatically arrested.
In Voi.
Yes, in Voi. The DPP was very loud and clear that he has sufficient evidence to sustain a prosecution. And as late as last week when the governor was before Magistrate Ogoti, the magistrate actually reprimanded the DPP because up to now even the Defense Council has not been able to receive the said evidence that the DPP said can sustain a prosecution. That points to a systemic problem that may be within the DPP's office that needs to be addressed. Because we may keep entertaining Kenyans that really there is war on corruption, but it is not amounting to anything. Kenyans out there want to see genuine efforts by either of the offices and actually speedy trials. Yes.
Honorable Milo Odhiambo, if I may come to that, of course, is subject to what's adduced before the courts of law and subject to proving of those evidence or the evidence presented before reasonable doubt, because that is how the operations are in the courts of law in the country. Honorable Milo Odhiambo, when you see an open ambivalence playing out in a court of law, when there is no charge sheet and the judge has no option but to let the accused, who in this case was the Kenya Ports Authority Managing Director, free, and this again comes to fore or to the surface, does it again kill the hopes? And do the DCI and the DPP in this case, or the state institutions, see it to be the reservoir of hope in the fight against corruption?
Well, I think, as I said before, the DCI and the DPP must put their act together, because in a different democracy, actually, they should have lost their jobs.
Or resigned because of pressure.
Yeah, because they're actually failing the president, because they are the face of the president in the fight against corruption. But if the two of you are the critical officers in the fight against corruption, and then you go and display discordance in court, because the DCI should have done effective investigations, and having done so, then you hand over to the DPP, who then takes over the prosecution, roles. But then you can't have the DCI moving direct to court, and then the DPP saying, I am not aware. I mean, really, then you are taking Kenyans for a ride. And I think because of that, really, I think it's fortunate they have a very good boss who can, withstand that kind of thing. But I'm glad that they've said it's a one-off. But should this actually be repeated, because Kenyans actually want to see a real fight against corruption, then they should not even wait for their boss to say anything. They should resign. Okay. Because this kind of display, that they are, treating Kenyans to, this is actually why people think that the fight of corruption, the fight against corruption is a lost cause.
Absolutely.
Because of this. But I also want to urge that even a lot of Kenyans have said it before.
Yes.
Do less media work. Do more real work. Do less media, hype, and do real work. Let the facts speak for themselves. Let it go to court. What as lawyers would call res ipsa loquitur. We shouldn't be waiting to be told by you, but let the facts speak for themselves. Let us see from the results that are appearing in court, so that even when we are accusing, at the point when they are accusing the judiciary, then at least we had an issue. We could say, well, the judiciary is taking a long time and all that. Okay. But now it's no longer even an issue of the judiciary taking. So now you are even taking us much further. I would rather that we say, well, judiciary, you are taking long, speed up. But now if you at the point where you should even be going to the judiciary with cogent, evidence and a proper case, you are already fighting amongst yourself. That's really, really not acceptable. Okay, now, Ben Mulwa, the point is that what we want to, in this particular case, get out is the deep problem that this country is in terms of corruption. I'm talking about more than 200 cases in court involving senior government officials. But the accusation has been the institutions, the agencies concerned, respectively in this case, the DCI, the EACC, and the DPP, going after the low-hanging fruits, in this case, low cases, and then there were subsequent successful convictions. I mean, they are not short of resources, not impeded by government, as was the case with Mr. Mwau, who was appointed in 1997 after the formation of the Anti-Corruption Agency in 1987, 10 years later, who was later sacked because Moi thought that he will impede him in terms of the presidency in the elections. Afterwards, he was sacked. Then the history all along, what Parliament has done to Lumumba, the likes of, coming to Philip Kinisu, they have the resources, they have the goodwill. What do you think then that is the impeding problem, the hurdle on the way for the DPP? A case of incapacitating themselves and when the capacity is there? We are a country that we have to have good understanding of our culture. And the truth is, we have reached, corruption in this country has reached endemic levels, whereby it is everywhere. People are bribing or cutting shortcuts to get their children to primary schools, to secondary schools, to colleges and universities, to get jobs. People, in fact, look at our behavior on our roads. Somebody will insist on dashing off immediately when the red lights have turned off at the roundabout. Somebody will insist on cutting the queue at the bank, even in functions and many other kinds of places. So we have an inherent culture that has made it nearly impossible to find a completely corrupt-free Kenyan. So what happens is, I have seen cases, or I have had cases whereby somebody presents themselves, especially to public servants, and Mheshimiwa, they'll tell you, we have this dossier, but also Mheshimiwa has another dossier that is in our possession about an investigating person or an investigating agency. So it becomes nearly impossible to find people who can completely rise above the confusion and claim to be, to have the moral ground
to competently fight corruption. So that remains a big impediment in the war against corruption. Now, at the institutional level, you realize we have had cases of individuals or even prosecutions that junior officers may either approach people who are likely to be prosecuted, and they tell you, you know what, if you get us this, we are going to hide your file. We have had, those are cases that happen every day.
So we're talking about a rot in the system.
We are talking about a completely, a society that is completely engulfed in a culture that we are finding it almost impossible to extricate ourselves from. And those are some of the issues that we have to put on the fore in terms of addressing corruption. You remember when the president, I think it was in 2018, when the president said that he wants to initiate lifestyle audits.
That was in Mombasa County.
In Mombasa. Na akasema ataanza na mimi, halafu huyu, halafu yule, and the chain should follow. Then suddenly there was an eruption, especially from the political circles. And people insisted that if we had to do a lifestyle audit, let's start in 1963. And that was the end of it.
That was the sentiments of Oscar Sudi.
Yes.
I mean,
no, and it gathered momentum, but it tells you that today, and there's an analogy that I've always been using. Corruption in this country looks like the way we are seated, the three of us here, and we all have our shoelaces tied together. So if you move Mulwa, then now Mweshimua will also move, and it moves Ayub, and now we are in a circus. So the web is so complex that we have almost everybody in some way touched by something that they did. Maybe there was some piece of land that they bought that they didn't pay stamp duty. There's always something about everybody. So it becomes a very complex process. I don't know how we can extricate. Okay, but there's something I want to...
You mentioned a very important point.
Yes.
That was about the statements made by the president and later, of course, countered by the Ruto allies, among them Oscar Sudi, to be specific, the member of parliament, who said, if we are to prosecute that, to implement, to effect what the president said in Mombasa County, then we have to start, or our starting point must be 1963. You talk about that, we have the TGRC report. It details everything between 1963 and 2008. Is that a cause, perhaps, that might be the delaying factor here in the fight against corruption, in terms of now people who want to hide underneath the war on corruption? Because if the TGRC is implemented, then we are likely to harass many aspects in this country.
Well, that's a possibility that if we go full throttle and implement some of these reports exactly as they are, there's going to be a lot of casualties, and it's going to affect a lot of individuals and a lot of sectors in this economy. But sometimes as a society we have to agree to bite the bullet. And that's what I think we are at that stage. But I have also taken time to understand where the genesis of the current problem we have. And believe you me, the biggest opportunity that we missed as a country was immediately after the promulgation of the new constitution. You know, the world over, the promulgation of any constitution is immediately followed by a general election, whereby the entire system goes back to seek a fresh mandate. But those who are in parliament that particular time found a sneaky way of being able to manage the interest, and it was still under the Grand Coalition government. So there had to be serious interest to be balanced. And that's where actually Chapter 6 of the Constitution was destroyed. That's where all manner of individuals found a back door to be able to find way into elective positions. And believe you me, so long as we have had that, because immediately after that, the next election now was in 2013,
about 2.5
where
years
we
ago.
had the president and the deputy president running while they were indictees at the ICC. And then that cascaded to the lowest level, where we had MCAs who had criminal cases running for office and all that. So it becomes very difficult, because ultimately also, Parliament plays a very significant role in terms of holding executive to account. To account.
Well noted points. And of course, what we want to do away with is the deep skepticism by the public here, Honorable Milo Odhiambo. After the break, I'm coming to you. And of course, we will want to know how, or what you have already talked about in regards to the media prosecution of the cases, and how the release of the videos in regard, or in effect, to Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei is likely again to affect investigations. And we'll be, of course, seeking to unpack that even after the break, as I seek the sentiments you have equally sent on the Twitter. That is the hashtag on News Compass, and we'll be sampling some of your feedback, not all, after the break, and equally look at your SMSs on the 40920 short code here on the program, and we'll be coming back with the discussion after the break here on News Compass. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the program Into the Second segment, and I'll sample some of your feedback on Twitter. The trending topic, Francis says, at least we now know those pretending to be fighting impunity and corruption. Nyumbani says, either way, I still believe that one day the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the DCI will have issues, and it's good for vibrant democracy. Otherwise, it will be dangerous for the two individuals or institutions to think exactly the same way. Mary Florence says, when you see any Kenyan pretending to be a fool and does not know what's happening around, something terrible and special is going down. And let me look at Jerry Nyandau. He says the DPP and the DCI institutions have been politicized and misused. Where is the EACC in the war on corruption? He poses that question. And Ouma says the effect of graft is like the air that we breathe. We cannot avoid it, whatever that we do. I'll take the last one here. Peter Otwaro says the media has to be at hand in help in the exposing of scandals and, more importantly, in generation of sufficient pressures on looters to come out through the court's interventions, denials or related responses by suspects, which is huge contribution. And this is from, let me find gender balance. Mama Mboga says the fight against corruption is dead in Kenya. And she uses the hashtag News Compass on Twitter. Thank you so much for your feedback. We can't sample all because of time, and I'll come to Honorable Millie Odhiambo. Fundamentally unhelpful is the term I can use to, describe where we are at the moment in terms of the scale. But what's your take-home notes in terms of the entire generation of the efforts by the national government, the goodwill shown so far, and the fact that you have pointed out the media prosecution of the cases by the institutions, and how will, in the case of the Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei, in this case what the DC has done, might affect its prosecution of the case in terms of the evidence and how substantial that can be to be proven by the courts of law?
Well, before I go to the issue of Sergeant, maybe I can just talk to what Mr. Mulwa talked about in relation to the what the Parliament did in 2010. And yes, I was actually in Parliament at that time. When you were elected. That was I was nominated that time. And I was part of the 27-member select committee that worked on the Constitution. And so I actually have an insider's view. And I can tell you there was a lot of goodwill from across the board. And I sat in the same committee with the current president, with the current deputy president, with a lot of our sitting governors. And everybody was very committed to giving, a new Kenya. And even though, I think it was immediately after the, post-election violence. So everybody was really looking at a make or break for the country. And the Constitution, to some degree, provided that, except, of course, for a few of the things that are now being looked at in BBI. But the Constitution does provide some of those critical issues. So it's not really that the politicians compromise. I don't think we did. We compromise on the system of governance. We compromise on one other two things. But in terms of values, we provided very, very clearly.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, the issue is Kenya, we need to retrace our paths on our values and principles. Okay. But that requires a lot of political goodwill. Because even then, you remember Kenyans were arresting, corrupt police. They were correcting.
That was citizen arrest.
Yes, citizen. Yes. They were effecting citizens' arrest. But for you to do that, then you need people at the top to be able to give that enabling environment. And I think at that point, if you ask me, President Kibaki had the excellent opportunity, and he didn't take advantage of that, because he was not coming in with a lot of these attached interests that everybody is talking about. So he actually missed a really golden opportunity to rid us of that. And I want to say that one of the people, Uma and the Mama Mboga, what they have said is sort of like giving up. Ouma has actually said graft is like air, like it's necessary. And indeed, Kenya graft is so endemic that it is almost like our second nature. And it's almost like what, when we were in primary, we used to read about Nigeria. We look like we're overtaking Nigeria. So really, it's not something that it's not a word that we can give up you know, on. We must fight corruption and we must kill corruption in this country. And even if we have many missteps, we will get our parts. And that's why I'm calling on the DPP and DCI to move away too much from the prosecution in the media. And on the issue of the sergeant and what they are actually showing us in the media, if you look at a lot of the crime networks, you know, in other countries, whenever you see the you know, not the investigative department showing that sort of evidence to the public, it must be part of a strategy for the eventual prosecution.
Okay. Yes,
it's not just for public interest that the public want to know. Sometimes there's information that is not even good for the case that might even compromise, you know, witnesses. So unless it is actually part of a very clear strategy, sometimes it's to unearth more information, that there may be somebody who has information that is hiding that information, and that when you actually air it out, they come out with it.
Okay.
So unless it's that, I would ask them and I encourage them to get off the media and do their work off the media.
Okay, I mean, making sure that you wrap your processes in a sort of secrecy, but you ensure that the end goal is what the public wants, because that is the intended goal.
Yes.
Ben Mulo, if I may come to you, then let's now turn our attention to what's on the plate here, the political plate, and I'm talking about President Uhuru Kenyatta and the ODM leader, Raila Odinga, her party leader, and who have leverage in this country and who have enviable political clout in terms of following.
Absolutely.
They shook hands. We had some form of political sanity following the uncertainty in 2017, and then they initiated sort of what they say is the Building Bridges initiative to a new Kenya. We are seeing some responses, Kenyans appearing before the committee. But most importantly is the question on whether this can be the remedy point to undo the damage done to this country politically, socially, and economically. All the same, though, corruption will not be off the test and discussion here. Can this be perhaps the radical surgery point to end corruption, to end political uncertainties, to end economic instability and uncertainties, and to strengthen our social fabric as a country?
No, it cannot be, and I have been consistent pointing out that. Foremost, I think the concept of the handshake was one of the best things that ever happened in this country. The country was pleasantly surprised and appreciated that handshake of March 9, 2018. And believe you me, temperatures went down from 100 to like -3 in a day. And I want to remember, because, you know, there was the Machozi Mondays before then.
Tuesdays.
Yes, and the Tear Gas Tuesdays. And believe you me, things went back to normal so fast. And if you look at the economic numbers of 2018, it was very exciting for the country. Despite a few people who may have had reservations about the handshake, a lot of things got into place. And suddenly now Kenyans were able to start doing their businesses without fears of reprisals from whatsoever quarters. And that really was a good thing. And I want to believe also the initiation of the BBI was a totally noble idea from the onset.
Why do you think it's not the remedy point?
No, I'll get you to that. I'll get you to that. It was a totally noble idea, you know, because we had come from a very divisive election. We had come actually from very divisive elections, and we had reached a point whereby even the divisions between citizens were at a crescendo, and for the president to pronounce boldly that there is need really for us to look back. I remember a particular time he addressed a rally in Kisumu where he said he wants to see an end to this winner takes it all concept. And it was really a noble thing. And even up to the creation of the task force and even up to the development of the first report, I think we were moving very well on the entire process until politics showed up on the process. And believe you me, now what we have witnessed about BBI since November last year is the exact opposite of what BBI should or intends to achieve. We have seen politicians taking advantage of a noble process to settle petty political scores, politicians making dangerous utterances that have now gone a long way to incite Kenyans and again agitate the population and raise tensions unnecessarily. We have seen a lot of intolerance in terms of managing these processes, and the sequence has become very worrisome. And even I want, when you see individuals like Professor Kivutha Kibwana, who was a serious proponent of BBI, pulling back and saying, wait a minute, something is horribly wrong here. And on Monday, I think I read an article by Professor Macharia Munene also, saying that now where we are, this thing is dividing this country even worse than we are. Then I think the principals need to take charge and call their lieutenants to order and insist that there must be sanity in the way we are conducting ourselves.
Okay.
What we witnessed in Mombasa,
on both ends.
yes, what we witnessed in Mombasa, and then it came to Kitui, then it went to Narok, and lastly in Meru, then something is horribly wrong in the manner in which we want to implement this. And now Kenyans have reached a point whereby they're like, wait a minute, I don't think this is really what we were negotiating for. I think a very noble idea and process that would have healed this country has been hijacked by people who are pursuing very narrow interests.
The people are the politicians.
Yes. Yeah, largely the politicians.
And they're on both ends, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
How do they now, the principals, call the soldiers to order? Because what we're seeing at the moment is the BBI being taken out of proportion and heading in the wayward direction. Yes. How bold should the president and
they need to come up very boldly, because you see, we have ended up with a scenario whereby BBI appears to be comprising a section of political alignments and excluding another political. And I'll give you specifics. If, for example, when Junet Mohammed read the Riot Act to Senator Murkomen about the Mombasa rally, if perhaps charge had been taken at that particular point, we would not have witnessed what developed in Narok or Kitui. When we saw the situation when Moses Kuria was forced to sit on the ground in Kitui, and people were okay with that. When we saw Atwoli actually telling people that he's going to lock them in their houses, you know, that was actually incitement in the public, and nothing was addressed about that. Then now certain tensions were big, because we have to agree, all politicians, be it Mheshimiwa Mili here or Junet or any other faction, they have their followers and they have people who passionately believe in them. So the minute we start seeing those differences being played out in public, it begins now to agitate and incite the public unnecessarily.
Okay, from a statement, my understanding before I come to Romili is that the BBI proponents or supporters improperly treating the other faction that is opposed, to be specific, the allies of the Deputy President, William Ruto. Okay. Honorable Mili, if I may come to you, the recommendation, the proposals in the BBI so far, what we have as a result of the launch of the report in November 2019 is plainly in the interest of this country. But what we continue to see a widening gap between members of the political establishment. You, of course, included part of the establishment. How do we, lessen this bridge, lessen this crack, and bridge the real bridge towards the real Kenya, in this case, for prosperity, politically, socially, and economically, including the fight against corruption?
Well, personally, I wouldn't be too worried, because even if you look at the constitutional making process, it was not an easy process. And it was marked by walkouts and a whole lot of things, if we actually remember. And the only thing I want to correct is it's the notion or the misinformation that the political process is taken by one wing in the exclusion of the others. Actually, as a matter of fact, the other wing that is perceived to be excluded have come for all the BBI processes. And from Mombasa through, they have come and they've been included, and they have been allowed to speak, even when some of us don't speak. I have gone with all the BBI process I've attended, I don't talk. And the Moses Kurias and the Murkomens speak. Why? Because it's in the spirit of inclusion. That's why some of us don't talk, because we must give others a chance. But in the, because sometimes people also, we want to be naive as a country, because a constitution making process is both legal and political. So the politics will play out. For me, the issue is ensuring that when the politics played out is managed well. Like, for instance, I was in Mombasa personally, and I saw the way Murkomen and Moses came. They come in late. When we are already seated, some of us are sharing chairs, and they want us to stand and give them the chairs, so that if they are not given, they create chaos. We still stood and gave them the chairs anyway. That's part of management. Okay. And at some point, some people got tired and told Moses to sit down because of really, they were basically trying to create fracas. Okay. What about Nakuru? Again, they send war threats because they say we are not included. What have we done? Graciously pulled back to allow inclusion.
That was in
so it's
not
about
Nakuru, Narok.
No, I'm saying Nakuru, because
yes,
Nakuru is forthcoming.
yes.
And it's being postponed to give time. You know, that's part of management of the process. So for me, the most important thing is to ensure, if people are saying we are not included, ensure that you include them. If they come and create fracas, just make sure the police is there to manage. And I can tell you that based on what they've been doing, the situation could have been more volatile than it has been. So I actually commend you know, other people for the way that they have actually managed the process before. I mean the process so far. That despite actually agitation, including in Meru, where I'm told that as the team was walking out, they told the young people, follow us and we give you money, so that they look like they're walking away with a crowd. So it was part of a managed process.
Okay.
So really, it's how we manage the process. It's how we manage the political aspect of it. But a constitutional process is not a tea party. A constitutional process, especially that talks about changing a governance structure, it's not a tea party. It's not a walk in the park. It's not a wedding.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about what you say, perhaps might be my interpretation that the differences can be political because you expect that it's part of the democracy.
Yes, yes.
But the important element is I want to point out what the leader of the minority in the Senate, James Orengo, Senator, your counterpart at ODM, said that there must be a referendum not later than July. And yesterday, the papers published that the IEBC is cash-strapped and cannot conduct any referendum because the financial year is already budgeted for. What does it mean for your quest, the call by your party in wanting an expanded...
Well, what I can tell you is that where there's a will, there's a way. So if we decided that we are doing a referendum, whether it's before July, whether it's before December, or by whatever time, we are the lawmakers. And as lawmakers, we can always avail that money if we chose to. So for me, that's not my worry. My worry is how we are managing the political process as much as we are managing the content. Because right now, it's a process where people are coming in and giving their views. Perhaps one of the things that I've raised, which is of concern to me, is that I've seen a new voice that is coming in, which is more divisive. And that is the voice of the religious leaders. That there are certain religious leaders which consistently align themselves with a given political alignment or a given political group. I actually talked about it in Parliament, and I said that for these people, they have decided that one political leader in the name of Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga is a devil to them, and wherever he comes, even if he told them that I'm bringing you so much, even if it's something in their interest, they will always find something to demonize. So for me, my worry is not even the political class. It's a group of other opinion leaders, including some religious leaders, that are poisoning this process. And I want to encourage them that in the interest of this country, that they need to be moderated and stop giving, like there's one I was listening to, and somebody is giving a prophecy which is really politics. Somebody is saying, no, this the Lord revealed to me, and you are just playing politics, saying the Lord revealed to me. The Lord also reveals to us. We are also Christians. Nobody has monopoly over the Lord. I am also a Christian. I talk to the Lord direct every morning and evening.
Everyone has a connection with the Almighty God.
Yes, absolutely.
We all seek solace by His power, and despite His power and miracle being behind, of course, beyond our comprehension, but we still are submissive to Him and the teachings both as laid out in the Bible and in the Quran. Of course, notwithstanding that Kenya is equally made up by other religious groups that, of course, the Constitution does respect. And coming to you as we finish up on the program.
Yes.
Ben Mulwa, it's deeply frustrating when you see the kind of political language that plays out, the rhetoric, I mean, the sort of political propaganda in the wake of the BBI. And what we want here is, or what Kenyans want to anticipate, is the BBI post-2022 for posterity, restoring order politically in this country, because our point always, our starting point of all the problems since 1997, except for 2002, is how we manage our elections, what follows, the killings, the human rights violations. We see us heading that way, as was the case with the 2005 referendum, where we saw voices that came out and were concerned. I mean, how will President Uhuru Kenyatta and the ODM leader Raila Odinga come out and take leadership? I mean, offer leadership from the top and be the guardrail in this case, and give us the direction, give the political class direction, call them to order for purposes of one thing and one agenda, Kenya.
You know, Ayub, one of the biggest tragedies we have had as a country for a very long time is the idea of making laws or changing laws with individuals in mind rather than the future. And you see, laws are expected to be able to stand the test of time. And I'll give you specifics. You remember, immediately after the 2002 elections, there was a slump in the agitation for a new constitution. And I remember a sentiment that was made by the late John Mishuki once. He said, but we wanted to change the constitution to remove Moi. Now Moi is gone, so what is the hurry?
There was no need, according to him, at the time.
I remember that sentiment. Until now it became untenable after the 2007 elections. Really, there was need to review the constitution. We are on record. We remember the Security Laws Amendment Act, Mheshimiwa. You were in Parliament that time.
That was in 2014, December.
In 2014.
I remember when I was beaten and undressed.
Yes, I remember that. And you realize these laws were being made by people who were completely drunk with power and who thought they can walk around as a colossus and do anything, even unconstitutional. So I don't sympathize when I see people like Akina Moses Kuria crying about their security being withdrawn, because they never said anything when Joho and all these other people were suffering. Okay. Because that idea of making laws to punish a particular section of individuals or other people is the same thing when you look at proposals to have BBI maybe restore Nairobi to the national government. People may have in mind Sonko as the reason why they want Nairobi reverted to the national government, without knowing that Nairobi has been here for the last 120 years, and Nairobi is going to outlive all of us. So this concept of making laws with that kind of myopic thinking becomes a problem. Even at the moment, and one of the key things, in fact, Mheshimiwa mentioned, and I want to emphasize on, is the content. We have lost sight of the content of what is in BBI. Okay. And now what we are witnessing out there are small political contests, people trying to push each other and box each other into certain corners, and it is actually serving against the intention of BBI. The question you asked about the president and the former prime minister taking charge, I still believe they have ample time to really reorganize how BBI is being spearheaded in the public domain and steer it back on a path whereby all Kenyans would feel comfortable to share their views, share their fears, and even share their aspirations in terms of, because it's been a learning process now. It's 10 years since we promulgated a new constitution. And you remember even by the time we had the new constitution, we all agreed that the document was 80% okay and there was 20% imperfect. So it is a good time, but it needs to be in a framework whereby there are no individuals issuing threats or people should not be intimidating any other quarters, whereby all Kenyans can feel free. You remember like the Bomas process, especially the latter one, despite a few hardline positions that had been taken by a few individuals, to a large extent, Kenyans were comfortable sharing their views. And my view is the president now has about 2 years before he leaves office, and he has an opportunity to really leave a legacy. In terms of, President Kibaki, despite the challenges, delivered the 2010 constitution. President Uhuru Kenyatta now needs to escalate that and even infuse into the process a sense of nationhood that is currently completely lacking, and ensure that even the current constitution is adequately implemented. And there's one thing I keep reminding people. When you talk about BBI trying to address ethnicity and all those things, I realize it is actually a game of musical chairs, because the current constitution elaborately addresses that. If the president could, for example, even today lead from the front, look at the composition of his cabinet. It does not reflect the face of Kenya. So as much as we are talking too much in political rallies and dancing to reggae music and inciting the public on some of these things, we need to start leading from the front now, so that even by the time we have a new document, at least Kenyans are all reading from the same script.
Same script for purposes of course, Kenyans attaining what they want at the end of the day: bread and butter, good infrastructure, healthcare, education, and get value for the services they pay. Honorable Milo Odhiambo, if I may come to you to give you the last final word here on the program. There is the issue about now the divisions in regard to what Senator Murkomen says at every platform when he goes to the BBI, and that is the position of the Deputy President William Ruto. Because personally, as a political journalist, I understand the dynamics. And there was a time the ODM party equally said, oh, there were cases of or reports of impeachment when the Ruto allies met in Naivasha. And the counter narrative was that the Deputy President William Ruto will be impeached. and then this goes on amid the BBI politics. In the event it comes to Parliament, will you vote for an impeachment of the DP William Ruto?
I don't think that is actually something that's on the table. That's something that Murkomen is using basically to drive a divisive agenda, which is allowed because really, I told you, this is both a political and a legal process. So he can play his politics, but for me, I don't mind his playing the politics so long as the views are being heard. And if you actually notice that despite all the drama, the views are consistently being heard. And if you actually look at it consistently, the views have improved as you go along. Right from, if you look at from when we started in Kisii, and you look at the views were presented in Kisii, they are not as strong as the views that were being presented as you move along, right up to Meru, right up to Mombasa. And I was so impressed even when I was listening to Mombasa, the way they articulated their issues very, very clearly about the issues that concern the coast and all that. So if you actually look region by region, people are articulating their issues very, very clearly and very, very carefully. If you look at even not only just that, even interest groups, both people are using through that process and through even the task force, people are actually presenting very clear issues. Yeah. So for me, that the political process will be there, but so long as the issues are being heard, whether people say you sing reggae or not, does not matter, because even you know, at the Jubilee, you know, launch,
that was in 2016.
There was reggae. So reggae has been part of the political process in Kenya.
Is historical.
I think it's historical in Kenya. Everything about it is. I even listened to a bishop from Nigeria that was saying that you know, reggae, there's a emancipation song which he was actually linking to a religious bit. And then finally, I think maybe just on the issue of inclusion, I can actually say an ethnic inclusion. Yes, there are provisions in the constitution, but if you want real ethnic inclusion, then we need to go back to the original draft, which is actually what is being proposed in BBI, which is having a parliamentary system that acknowledges that we are a very diverse, you know, society, and that you do not necessarily have to go for the winner take it all because of the way we are diverse. So for me, to that extent, I support this. And if you actually look at part of the reason that you see even the Rift Valley, not even as they're playing the politics, but they're actually supporting BBI, because they're also in support of that system. Because everybody knows that either way, in the end, this is actually what is beautiful for Kenya. In terms of Nairobi, I think Nairobi is not necessarily about Sonko, but we did a mistake, because Nairobi is the city. It is actually where everybody converges, and we should not leave it in the hand of governors, because I look around now and you see the mess in Nairobi. That's not something that we should be leaving to a governor. It should be you leaving the county assembly to make decisions about zoning, that areas that shouldn't be zoned in a given way. Now it's a decision of the county. No, that's an issue of the capital city. Should be an issue that is debated by the entire national, you know, assembly that represent the country, because this is our, you know, the city of the country.
It's the mother city.
It's the mother city. So we actually did a mistake. So for me, I don't think it's really necessarily about Sonko, even though Sonko, you know, has his own political problems, and I wish him very well. In the context, I shouldn't be wishing him very well, given the things he said about me, but I wish him well nonetheless. I should be gloating, but I wish him well nonetheless. And but actually, so really, for me, I'm happy that despite the theatrics, views are being had.
But actually, very quickly, Mheshimiwa, as we finish up, you know, I've taken time also to look through what has been happening in Nairobi, and especially in the last 2 years, say, under the administration of Sonko. And now I get concerned when you talk about some of these functions going to the national government. If you look at Mama Lucy Kibaki Hospital, when it was before even the advent of devolution, and what has been happening in the last couple of years, when you look at Mbagathi Hospital, when you look at Pumwani Maternity Hospital, that has been transformed in the last 2 years to almost a first-class kind of a hospital. And then you reflect that against the status of Mathare Hospital, which is a national facility, and Kenyatta National Hospital. Then you realize the problem is not really whether it is within the county government or the national government. There is a systemic problem that needs to be addressed about governance generally in this country. Because we may be shifting some of these responsibilities, but at the end of the day, what do we have to show? Even because Nairobi became a County in 2013, what was the status or what was the state of Nairobi between, say, 1990 and the year 2012? Because those are some of the issues we need to be able to reflect
What
on.
I can tell you,
yes.
for me, speaking as a person living in Nairobi, is that there were things that were operational before we made Nairobi a county, which are not operational now.
Yes.
That was pre-2013.
Yes, pre-2013.
Yes.
Areas that we live in are filthy.
Yes.
There are hawkers all over. Everybody, slums are coming up in suburbs. I wake up one morning and I find somebody has erected a structure outside my house,
yes.
with the pepper bags and
yes.
stuff. That never used to happen before.
Yeah.
There is a disorder.
Yes.
There is
Okay.
disorder
yes.
going on all over.
And
I think what the governors are doing,
yes.
which for me is a discordance, the national government may not have been doing perfect in the Panganis or whatever,
yes.
but the governors, what they do is they focus on populous areas where they look for votes.
Yes.
Then they forget where they call our babies.
Yes.
They don't care about you. But I also deserve services,
Okay.
even if I'm a Mbabi.
Of course
I deserve services.
You all are entitled to
Even
one
if you
vote at
have
the end
to.
of the day.
Yes.
And you are part of the general population.
So I cannot be forgotten merely because we elected a governor.
Yes.
I would want all these services spread across informal
Universally.
settlements and others.
Okay,
Yeah.
and a level playing field. Yes, Honorable, Ben Mulwa, because of time I'm told to get out. I do thank you your time. Thank you so much, Ben Mulwa.
I appreciate
governance and
yes.
political commentator. I do appreciate your time. Good evening, and Honorable Millie Odhiambo.
you.
Yes.
And thank you so much. So let's now take a look at this. Now, this week, a 30-second video clip of Kenyans accosting an Asian man and a woman and accusing the pair of being carriers of the deadly coronavirus went viral on Twitter. Foreign Affairs Principal Secretary Ambassador Macharia Kamau said the perpetrators should be subjected to the Kenyan anti-hate law as enshrined in Article 27 of the Constitution and the National Cohesion and Integration Commission Act number 12 of 2008. Well, Ambassador Kamau lacks the moral authority, isn't it? Since he said, and I quote, COVID-19 is not the first and the most deadliest. Maybe Ambassador Kamau can explain to us why streets in Beijing in China and 10 towns in Italy are empty. And certainly, it's not because of a zombie apocalypse. For the Kenyan incident, let me call it the coronaphobia. Ever since the outbreak of the virus in Wuhan city in Hubei province in China, the global community was concerned with efforts of the Xi Jinping's government in China. But under that unknowingly was the tired tropes and damaging stereotypes. Call it xenophobia. Across the globe, panic, mutual blaming, and even radical discrimination is evidently justified by the coronavirus. But we are lazy enough, aren't we, to use racial stereotypes. And did the Kenyans who appeared in the video abuse the right nationality? They are East and Southeast Asians who are not Chinese and are among global victims. Some people might look like Chinese but can come from Malaysia or Taiwan or North Korea or South Korea or Singapore. They are just a group of one people, though they share culture. Simply put, the Maasais of Kenya and Tanzania, or Kenyan Somalis, or Somalis in Ethiopia, Djibouti, or the Luyas in Western Kenya, or the Luyas in Uganda. In our case, it's underreported racism, a case of moral decay. If the intent was to imply that the Chinese are not welcome here in Kenya, they are welcome in Kenya. Now, across Europe, politicians have been quick to exploit the outbreak by heaping suspicion on immigrants. It was an opportune moment for the far-right opposition leader in Italy, Matteo Salvini, to make gains at the expense of the coronavirus. Not forgetting Italy is the most second affected country in Europe and the world, respectively. Besides him, the coronavirus has become propaganda tool for Marine Le Pen in France and the Alternative for Germany, or Deutschland, AfD, and other far-rights in Europe. Fake news and narratives by the aforementioned leaders in Europe present the Chinese Europeans, migrants and refugees as coronavirus carriers. And this has led to a surge in extreme anti-immigration sentiment. In this climate of post-fact and fear, the European far-right, or more broadly the global one, has found its patient zero to rebrand and relaunch a campaign of hate. This is no different from events post-Charlie Hebdo attacks in France, January 2015, that gave birth to normalized Islamophobia in Europe. But despite the global hashtag support Je suis Charlie, France, home to Europe's biggest Muslim population, has failed to tame Islamophobia. Besides Islamophobia, anti-Semitism is also growing in Germany. Anti-Semitic crime and hate crime targeting foreigners each increased by almost 20% in 2019, and nobody should close their eyes to this further increase in anti-Semitism because the Jews again are exposed to a threat 74 years after the Holocaust. While we contextualize this, let's not forget about the incredible and presidential statement by Donald Trump on the Charlottesville attacks and said, I quote, "There were good people on both ends of the conflict." His America First policies have increased white nationalism's fanning flames of hate against the Jews, Muslims, African Americans, and Latinos. In our Kenyan context, what happened to the two Asians is uncalled for. What, however, partly fanned that hate is the government's inability to educate the public on coronavirus. Instead, a Kenyan who shot the video of the Chinese plane landing at JKIA was fired and threatened with terror-related charges. Wow. This is what Professor Jeremy Keenan calls out in his book, The Dark Sahara, that terrorism has become self-fulfilled prophecy for African leaders to remain in power. In this context, the Kenya Airways, Kenya Airports Authority, and Ministers Fred Matiang'i, Cecily Kariuki, and James Macharia will fit it. It took the High Court of Kenya's intervention to suspend all flights from China. In other words, the court said the ministers were incompetent. To be clear, an incompetence that endangered 47 million Kenyans. But how did the government clear all the 239 passengers on board when it took days for blood samples of one suspected case to be flown to South Africa for proper analysis? Why did the government shroud in secrecy the landing of the Southern China Airline flight? How effective is our team at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport and all entry points across the country? What lessons did we archive from our team that helped in the containing of the Ebola outbreak in 2014 in West Africa? We do not want lies, cover-ups, and repression in the case of the Chinese authorities in China in case of any eventuality. This is the bottom line. The glue between the government and the people is trust, and the government appears to be wasting that critical resource. We'll see you next week here on News Compass. Good night.